Story 1. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the track was usually a lullaby, a familiar drone that smoothed the rough edges of the day and coaxed me into sleep. But tonight, on the last train out of the city, the rhythm felt different. It was a jagged, uneven beat, like a dying heart struggling to maintain its pulse. I'd booked a sleeper carriage, a rare indulgence, hoping for a truly restful journey before the early start at my new job. Now, nestled in my cramped compartment, the thin blanket doing little to ward off the creeping chill, I regretted every penny. It was well past midnight. The carriage was sparsely populated, a scattering of hunched figures swallowed by the gloom. The only light emanated from the dim, flickering bulbs overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every sway of the train. I'd tried to read the worn paperback in my lap, but the words blurred, my eyes drawn to the window. Outside, the landscape was an inky black canvas, punctuated only by the occasional skeletal silhouette of a lone tree or the distant baleful glow of a farmhouse. A woman had boarded at the last suburban stop. She was odd, small, bird-like, with unnervingly pale skin and eyes that seemed too large for her face. She'd settled into the seat opposite mine in the common seating area before I'd retreated to my compartment. I'd caught her staring, her gaze fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. It wasn't the casual glance of a fellow traveler. It was a slow, deliberate appraisal, like a predator studying its prey. I'd averted my eyes, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Then came the jolt. The train shuddered to a violent halt, throwing me against the thin wall of my compartment. The clatter died, replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by the faint squeal of metal protesting its sudden stillness. Outside, there was nothing. No station lights, no houses, just the oppressive, suffocating darkness of the countryside. A few muffled murmurs rippled through the carriage. I strained to hear over the pounding of my own heart. A conductor's voice, tinny and strained, crackled over the intercom. "Apologies for the unexpected stop. Technical difficulties. We have to wait for assistance." The words were delivered with a hesitant, almost fearful cadence. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an eternity. The silence was more terrifying than the noise had been. It amplified every creak of the carriage, every rustle of fabric. I imagined unseen things lurking in the darkness outside, drawn to our vulnerability on these lonely tracks. Then, a sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from the outside of my compartment door. Tap. 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 It was slow, deliberate, not the frantic knocking of someone needing help. My blood ran cold. Who would be out there? I held my breath, listening. The tapping continued, unwavering. It was too low to be from a window, too close to be from the carriage floor. It was coming from the exterior wall, just outside my thin door. Hesitantly, I crept towards the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the latch. A surge of adrenaline told me not to. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to pretend I was asleep, to become invisible. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand, propelled me forward. With a soft click, I opened the door a crack. The corridor was empty, dimly lit by the same flickering overhead lights. The tapping had stopped. A wave of relief, so potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. It was just my imagination playing tricks. The stress of the new job, the unsettling stillness. And then I saw it. On the dusty floor of the corridor, just outside my compartment door, was a single, small, pale handprint. It was made of something dark and viscous, something that glistened faintly in the dim light. It hadn't been there before. I slammed the door shut, my breath catching in my throat. My hands flew to the lock, fumbling with the bolt until it was firmly in place. I backed away, my eyes wide, scanning the confines of my compartment as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. The tapping started again, this time at the window. Louder, more insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing myself against the wall, willing it to stop. I could feel the vibrations through the metal frame, a chilling connection to whatever was out there. I didn't sleep that night. I sat huddled in my compartment, the thin blanket pulled tight around me. listening to the muffled sounds of the train and the increasingly frantic tapping. The darkness outside pressed in, no longer just an absence of light, but a palpable presence. And with every jolt and shudder of the train, with every inexplicable pause, the isolation gnawed at me, the fear a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The train was a metal box, hurtling through the darkness, and I was trapped inside with something that wanted in. Story 2. The last sleeper north is a lonely beast. It groans out of the city's electric glare just after midnight, a rattling metal tube plunging into the vast, rural darkness of the country. I'm a regular on this route, a sales rep whose territory is stitched together by these grim, nocturnal journeys. I've learned to sleep through the rhythmic clatter, the shriek of the brakes, and the muffled announcements for towns no one has ever heard of. But tonight was different. The carriage was unusually sparse, the air thick with the sour smell of disinfectant and damp wool. Across the aisle, an old woman sat ramrod straight, her fingers a blur as they worked a pair of knitting needles. The yarn was a deep, unsettling black. She never looked up, but the relentless, frantic click-click-click of her needles felt like a countdown. A few rows ahead, a man in a cheap suit stared out the window, though there was nothing to see but our own ghostly reflections superimposed on a canvas of absolute black. He was unnervingly still, not even blinking. He wasn't watching the scenery. He was watching the void. The first jolt came an hour out of the city. It wasn't the usual gentle sway of the tracks. It was a visceral lurch, followed by the screech of metal on metal that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes. The lights flickered, casting the carriage in a strobe of sickly yellow and shadow, before settling on a dim, emergency glow. We slid to a dead stop. Outside, there was nothing. No station lights, no signal tower, not even the faint glimmer of a farmhouse. The hypnotic clack-clack of the wheels was replaced by a profound, unnerving silence. The kind of silence that presses in on your eardrums. I looked around. No one reacted. The man in the suit remained a statue, his gaze fixed on the black glass. The old woman's needles hadn't missed a beat, their frantic clicking now deafening in the quiet. I felt a prickle of cold sweat on my neck. This wasn't right. In my 5 years of writing this line, we had never, ever made an unscheduled stop in the middle of nowhere. My phone, predictably, had no signal. My heart started to thud a heavy, clumsy rhythm against my ribs. I tried to rationalize. A deer on the tracks. A technical fault. But the calmness of the other passengers was an infection, more terrifying than any mechanical failure. Then, a sound. A soft, pneumatic hiss. The carriage door at the far end slid open. The conductor wasn't there. The opening revealed only the dark, narrow corridor to the next car. One by one, in a slow, dreamlike procession, the other passengers stood up. The man in the suit turned from the window, his face as blank and empty as a porcelain mask, and walked towards the open door. The old woman finally stopped her knitting, carefully placing the needles and the black yarn on her seat before following him. A young couple I hadn't even noticed before, holding hands with vacant smiles, joined the silent exodus. They didn't speak. They didn't look at each other. They simply filed out of the carriage and disappeared into the corridor. I was alone. The silence that followed was worse. It was a living thing, breathing in the stale air. I was frozen to my seat, a primal fear cementing my limbs. Get off? Stay on? My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but my body refused. I slid down in my seat, trying to make myself small, my eyes fixed on the empty doorway. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then I heard footsteps, slow and measured, coming back down the corridor. But they were different now, heavier. A dragging sound accompanied them, a soft shh against the worn carpet. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was the man in the suit. His face was still blank, but his suit was now spattered with something dark and wet that glistened in the dim light. He stepped aside, and then the old woman appeared, her hands also stained. They weren't alone. They were half carrying, half dragging a new passenger between them. A man, his face pale with shock, his mouth agape in a silent scream. He wore the uniform of the train's conductor. His feet made that soft dragging sound as they pulled him into the carriage and deposited him in the seat directly opposite me. He stared forward, his eyes wide and unseeing, a single dark red line trickling from his hairline. The carriage door hissed shut. With a sudden, violent jolt that threw me back against my seat, the train began to move. The familiar clack, 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 clack of the wheels resumed its rhythm, a sound I once found comforting, now the beat of a monstrous heart carrying me deeper into the night. Across the aisle, the old woman picked up her needles. She glanced at the new silent passenger, then looked directly at me for the first time. A thin, bloodless smile touched her lips. The needles started clicking again, a new pattern for a new stop. And I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that there would be another one.